This is a very important session, and we have one of India's top thinkers, experts on oral affairs with us. He has two collaborators, so we welcome all of them. Now, the paper has been well, the PPT probably will be presented, and he was very kind to share a draft paper with me. I will not comment on the paper, but two introductory points I would like to mention, because urbanization, environment, and the poor, issues of both sustainability and equity, how he has been able to address. One issue is about the basic services, the concept of basic services. And is it statistics driven or needs driven? And our concept of needs, our changing concept of needs. Is it sort of early stage of development influencing your notion of basic services, or as multidimensional poverty and the concept of poverty has been changing, from calorie concept to now multidimensional poverty, etc. Similarly, whether basic services concept need a fresh definition. Therefore, water, that is drinking water, sanitation, electricity, and fuel, these four that the paper has taken up. And on this, the statistical evidence, but we haven't had census of 2011, therefore there are problems. But thanks to National Family Health Survey, some support, and therefore I would like to put that question on the table. The concept of basic services, whether you have to reconceptualize. That's one. Now the second thing is something which I take the opportunity of having Amitabh Kundu here to share. And my thinking now on this is more firm than ever. That all urban studies have to be really linked to rural studies. And you have to take up practically every issue concerning urbanization as rural-urban linkage studies. Whether it is, and if you are interested in the poor, most of all, the poor come from villages, and the migrant labor, and so on. And in all the recent history, and particularly in the very recent history, liberalization, the neoliberal intervention, which really made urbanization as the top of development and the growth strategy. And what kind of urbanization? It really reflects high rise, high speed, high energy, high consumption civilization, human civilization. Very unsustainable. So the environment scholars have to take very serious note of it. And neoliberal capitalism has put that notion of growth at the center. And you saw during the COVID period how that collapsed. And now in the AI-driven impetus by world capital, which thinks that they are back to business as usual, as if COVID did not teach them any lesson. as if the same growth model can sustain itself. I mean, they have some marginal, human-centric development, but you do the growth model in the same way. There are some minor concessions here and there, but the neoliberal growth model is backed by AI in a new phase of global monopoly capital with a vengeance. And the modern city is the center of that initiative. Millennium City is an old concept now. It is now this AI-driven services managed digital city. So the Millennium City to the digital city, which is even more unsustainable. So the environment scholars have to be completely recasting their thought and action and policy. And you can imagine why I felt that this is the occasion. We have been in conversation about such things from mid-80s. And so with these words, I invite, and there are many interesting questions. I will not preempt them that they have discussed. Whether the poor pollute, their answer is no. Inequalities, we have very simplistic notions about inequalities, they are challenged. And so many very interesting formulations they have in the paper. With these words, I now invite Amitabh and his colleagues to present.
Thank you. Professor Mohanty, sitting next to you brings me back the old memories of 2 decades back when we are together in China. Professor Dubey, Professor Nityanan, Maharin, Professor Smita, colleagues and friends. It's a privilege for me to be associated with this event in honor of Dr. Gurgabai Deshmukh, who stood for social justice and equity. I'm very happy that the 2 sessions today and also the whole seminar is really linked with those issues. I thought, keep the youthfulness of the presentation of Sukanya. I was thinking of asking to make the presentation, but Professor Dubey persuaded me. He said age should not be discounted, so I don't stand at a disadvantage. When we look to the literature, there is on impact of climate change on cities located in different physiographic regions, different climate change, climatic areas, also in countries at different levels of economic development. We find the literature to be very rich in conceptualization, very intense. Also, we find plenty of work on, again, conceptualizing the impact of climate change on poor in the urban areas. I can tell you 2 major studies. One, the leadership of World Bank with other international organizations, which talk about vulnerability of the poor and how that can be addressed. Also, International Institute of Environment and Development taken 14 case studies of most vulnerable cities, saying how again the adaptation strategy should be designed to protect the poor, reduce their vulnerability. You see, basically, urban poverty in the literature is seen differently from rural poverty. Rural poverty is considered to be lack of rural development. As development takes place, rural poverty goes down. As far as urban poverty is concerned, is a thesis that it can be because of lack of urban development, but it can be because of development, urban development itself. Nature of urbanization could be such that it draws in formal workers, migrant workers, and the percentage of poor does not go down. Now, given this context, the global directions of solution is urban poverty will stay. This is a part of urbanization. So, you cannot eliminate urban poverty completely. So, better have adaptation strategies so that the climate change vulnerabilities can be addressed. And one important point that was mentioned by Professor Nityanand and yesterday by Dr. Saxena, poverty is the greatest polluter. This is one statement, very controversial statement. We thought we'll take that also as a point for investigation. That is it true that the areas or the cities which have high urban poverty are having high level of climatic vulnerability? Whether poor people's not getting access to basic amenities, is it forcing them to use non-renewable resources or such methods which is creating pressures on the air and the land resources? This was one of the hypotheses that we took up. Now, I just give you the database. We have used information from population census. Unfortunately, that ends in 2011. We have national sample survey data, which also gives information on urban basic services. And the latest that we have is from NFHS, National Family Health Survey. It goes up to 2021, even after the COVID period. There is literature in India also. Dr. Shamik Ravi, who is member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, has brought out a paper on basic services. But much of the literature is on conceptualization. Basically the theoretical framework, how it can be done. Empirical rigor was really not that strong, excepting in this paper by Shamik Ravi. But there also emphasis is not on environmental sustainability. The emphasis is on social equity, whether the access to basic amenities has been higher during the present government's period, NDA government period, to Muslims, to Hindus, to scheduled caste, scheduled tribe. But that's a very good empirical work. We have also investigated that. But nonetheless, this paper is focused on really environmental sustainability issues. Can you go to the first graph, please? This is giving us drinking water, access to drinking water from 3 different sources shown by 3 different colors. We have brought in rural and urban together to show, just in the initial macro analysis, the rural-urban disparity. What we find, the first 2 are urban, access to drinking water. The second 2 is rural, from census. We are not calculating the growth rate of census with NSS because their concepts are somewhat different. So we can calculate growth rates from census, and the last 6 are from National Family Health Survey. That's at 3 points of time: 2005, 6, 2015, 16, 2019, 2001. This last National Family Health Survey was disturbed because of COVID, so they extended it by another year. What is the picture? What is the story that we're getting? We're getting the story that there is slight improvement by all the sources in access to improved drinking water, which includes certain categories, kacha wells, etc., not included, which are not safe. But one thing is very clear: the rural-urban disparities are declining over time, and that's a good thing. That urban-rural inequality in access to drinking water has gone down. Now, if I miss something, you will stop me.
Sure.
Second, can you go to the next one? Yes. What we wanted to know, that the improvement is very small. That could be because we have already reached 90% level. But we wanted to find out where the improvement is coming from. Improvement is coming from piped water. The piped water is something which is cheap, accessible, and the poor people, if they have it, fine. But generally, access to piped water we found is for the middle class and upper class. That is where the increase has taken place. Increase has taken place in improved drinking water in terms of ROs and bottled water. Again, that's a middle class and upper class. Where things have gone down is access to public stand posts, community water, access to tube wells. Community tap water figure going down actually is something a matter of concern as far as poor is concerned. Similarly, tube wells and hand pumps are coming up, are existing in the peripheries of the urban centers. And that is why the degenerated peripheries are emerging, where the access to drinking water has actually gone down. And that is something which is worrying, that improved water, yes, it has gone up. But if you consider only piped water and tube wells, you find that it has gone down. So I think even in the story of improvement of improved drinking water, there is a concern for the poor which is built into it. But rural-urban disparity certainly has declined. Please go to the next one. This is toilet facilities. Again, we have three different sources, and we find improvement here is significant. Basically because of Swachh Bharat Mission and all that, and we do find that, again, rural-urban disparities are declining. I was, in fact, responsible chairing that Swachh Bharat Mission for rural areas, and we do find that it's not because of me, because of the government's thrust of the program. But certainly, I disagreed with the announcement that 100% coverage has taken place. I said, sorry, as the chairman of the statistical committee, I cannot support that. But nonetheless, improvement is significant. Rural-urban disparities are gone now. Next, this is electricity. Electricity level was already very high in the rural and urban areas. So we get a happy story that the rural-urban differences are declining, and we have trend towards convergence. The last one that we have covered is LPG, liquid. This is next one, please. Yes, here you find that the improvement is most significant in the rural and both urban areas, but the gap was so high in 2001. The rural figure you can see, the third one was so low, and this has gone up significantly, and yet this is one factor which is creating environmental problems in the urban areas. You find gap between the rural and urban is pretty high in this case. So this is where convergence is taking place, but still the gap remains very high. Next slide. Now we calculated the growth rate of improvement. This is slightly politically sensitive issue, since Shramika Ravi talked about it, and the paper showed that the improvement was higher during 2015-16 to 2021. We wanted to investigate whether this is correct, that the improvement during 2005 to 2015, 10-year period, and the improvement during 4.5-year period, 2015-16 to 2021, where the growth rate is higher. There's an interesting policy question, and the paper of Shramika showed that the improvement has been all along higher. Somehow, we show in our analysis that improvement is lower in the second period for electricity and for drinking water. As far as toilets and LPG, gas, the improvement is significantly higher in this second period. And I'll tell you the reason for it. It's slightly mathematical issue that she has said, and since the paper is being talked at the highest level in the Prime Minister Advisory Council, I just thought I'd mention. Please allow me a small mathematical, the teacher in me comes out. How do you calculate growth rate? How she has calculated the growth rate is x2 minus x1. x2 is the terminal year, x1 is the base year. That you divide by what to find out the growth rate? Of course, first 10 years period you divide by 10. Here 4.5 years, divide by 4.5. Then it becomes annual. Then what do? You have to divide by the base year value, generally x2 minus x1 upon x1. What she does in this paper is x2 minus x1 divided by 100 minus x1. For example, increase in the coverage in toilet or drinking water divided by uncovered percentage. Not the, don't divide by the base year value, but divide by uncovered percentage. And it makes some sense. Because think about it, if coverage is 90%, to make it 91% or 92% is quite difficult. But 10% to 12% is easy, because uncovered. So that is the logic that she has applied. But this cannot be applied all throughout. 50 to 52 is, easier than 60 to 62. So what we did, we calculated both. And I personally think that this approach of calculating growth is a methodological issue. That why do you divide the base year value? If you divide by the base year value, then the developed states where already high figures are there, their growth rate will come down because you are dividing by a higher value. And the second period, since the base has gone up, if you divide by the base, the growth rate will be lower. So that's why she said that don't divide by the base year value, divide by the base year uncovered population. We have given both the growth rates, and it is true that if you divide by the increase in the urban percentage, because it is not the absolute number, percentage of urban coverage by drinking water, sanitation. So you divide by the uncovered population, the growth rate is higher in the second period. So that I put a full stop to this controversy because it's not that important. But in the social context, her paper shows that access to Muslim population for drinking water, sanitation, toilets is much higher than the non-Muslim population. That's a significant point, but I don't want to get into that because we have done some exercise. We'll discuss it some other time. Next, this is size class-wise. We wanted to find out what is the difference in the access to drinking water, sanitation, electricity and LPG in class 1 cities. In class 1 also 5 million plus, 1 million to 5 million and 1 lakh to 1 million. So we do find that higher the city size, higher is the access to all the facilities. So as the size class goes down, you find percentage of access to all the 4 services declines up to class 4, to 20,000. But below 20,000, 20,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 5,000, below 5,000, they are more or less same because there are many statutory towns come up, public sector towns. The government has recognized them, and there the decline does not take place. So basically, what comes out clearly that the larger the city, higher is the access to basic amenities. You must remember, you keep on complaining about Delhi, Bombay, percentage of people having access to all the 4 facilities, and we have taken at least 12 others, generally higher. Of course, there is a problem of congestion and pollution that we have brought in the state level analysis, but this is one thing. But what we find is there is a convergence here also. The coefficient of variation across the 8 categories have gone down over time. So over time you do find that the smaller towns have come up a little bit, but still the gap remained in 2020-21. Next. Now we come to bottom 20%, because focus is on poor. We have not defined poverty line, because that's a very, very difficult thing. Consumption expenditure data is not available. How do you define a poverty line? So what we have done is to take bottom 20% and find out how the access to bottom 20%, how that has improved, and how the access to total urban population has improved. Whether the bottom 20% have benefited more than the average urban population. Is that right? So we are really comparing the access to drinking water and improvement in that, access to toilets and improvement in that, and access to electricity and LPG for the bottom 20% compared with the total urban population. And what we find, again, very happy to report that the bottom 20% have benefited much more than the average, which means that there is a convergence even for the bottom 20% and the average. We have covered the period from 2005-06 to 2021. There we find that you can't say that the bottom 20% benefited more in the first period or the second period. I think in both the periods we do find that the poor people have. So we have some faith in the redistributive and welfare programs because the gap between bottom 20% and the average has declined in case of all the 4 communities. We'll go to the next one. Now this is the annual rate of change we have shown in the first period and the second period. I've already mentioned. We can skip it. Now we can keep it also. Next one.
Next.
Next. Now, the second part, and I will take another 5-10 minutes, right? What we did is to do a state level analysis. And we brought in 3 sets of indicators. One is urbanization and poverty at the state level. Second is access to basic amenities. And the third are the environmental stress indicators at the state level. And the question that we asked is whether it is urbanization level, industrialization, the millennium cities and concentration of population. You know, India has one of the most top-heavy urban structure. Can you believe 72% of the urban population is in class 1 cities? 25% of our total urban population lives in 5 million plus cities, which is not the case in any European country or much above global average. So the question that we are asking, is it urbanization, industrialization, higher the level of the urbanization in the state, large cities are there, is the problem of environmental pollution there, and access to basic amenities, is it higher? Or is it the poverty which is responsible for environmental pollution? So we have, in the first, we have taken urbanization set and poverty. Poverty is being captured by 3 indicators. One is multidimensional poverty. You know, we don't have consumption expenditure database poverty figures are not available. But multidimensional poverty is a good proxy because it includes access to basic services also. So we have taken that at the state level. Kacha houses, that's also an indication of poverty. And third is slums. So basically the question we are asking, is it urbanization which is resulting in environmental degradation, or is it poverty? What we find, this general thesis that big cities are attracting migrants and the informal workers are coming in, and that's what is creating congestion and creating pollution because the poor people live in unhygienic conditions. They are not getting access to LPGs and other facilities, so they use non-renewable resources. Is that the reason? So we wanted to have simple correlation analysis. What we find first, that urbanization level at the states has no correlation with poverty. On the other hand, there's negative correlation, which means larger the city size or more urbanized estate, lower is the percentage of poverty, urban poverty I'm talking about, which means that urbanization in India has been exclusionary. The rate of migration from rural to urban areas has not been very high. And you know, we had Millennium Development Goals which said 100 million slum dwellers condition should be improved. India reported the maximum reduction in slum population, partly because of the strategies of slum eviction, you know, which was done. So basically, poverty and urbanization level are not positively correlated. Poverty in the class 1 cities is much less. I'm talking multidimensional poverty is much less compared to small and medium towns. It is the less developed states, less urbanized states, and lower order states, you know, statutory towns and census towns. The census towns which are not recognized by the government, that's where the poverty is being concentrated. So basically, urbanization is exclusionary to the extent that the access to urban land and access to basic amenities is becoming less in the larger cities. Then we try to find out the relationship of urbanization. I'll take another 2-3 minutes. Urbanization and basic services. Higher the level of urbanization, like Maharashtra, Gujarat, you know, Tamil Nadu, you find access to basic amenities is high. So urbanization level going up means level of basic amenities also tend to go up. But the relationship with all the environmental indicators, I can't read it. Can you read these 4 indicators?
Population density in urban areas according to census 11, air quality in urban areas.
Number of days.
Basically, this is number of days with air quality more than 50 in a year, and percentage of municipal solid waste processed to the total municipal solid waste generated. plastic waste generated per thousand population and per capita fossil fuel consumption.
So all these indicators show a strong, negative correlation with urbanization. Then as urbanization goes up, you can put it the other way also, that the environmental quality goes down. The processing of municipal waste becomes less if urbanization level goes up. And then we try to find out the relationship with poverty. If the level of poverty is high, access to basic amenities is low. All the amenities you find at the state level show a lower percentage of people covered under the 4 facilities. But as far as the environmental quality is concerned, this has nothing to do with poverty, urban poverty. So poor people take a lot of space. This is not true. The urban density, some dwellers take much smaller space than being talked about in the policy level. And they are not responsible for really using non-renewable resources or plastic consumption. So this is interesting. I mean, I'm not saying anything very definitive about it, but this relationship certainly makes us a little bit concerned about this proposition that poor are the biggest polluters. This is a very broad state level analysis. I think one can get the correlation much better if you go to the city level or the district level. But this is certainly which tells me that the concern that this seminar has, that it is really not the poor who are responsible for environmental degradation, and in fact they are much more vulnerable because of the climate change impact, and they need to be protected. It is certainly true that urban poverty cannot be eliminated because urbanization itself has a built-in thing that informal sector will come in. So there has to be serious emphasis on adaptive strategy. You can add something. I just need.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So, distinguished chair, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, esteemed Mr. Mujkan Tudehi, President CST, my co-panelist Professor Amitabh Kundu, discussion Madhum ma'am, ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply honored for this opportunity to engage in this fruitful discussion while we are discussing sustainable, urbanization, focusing on the provisioning of access to basic amenities among urban poor. So, in addition to the Professor Kundu's in-depth and well-rounded presentation, I just want to highlight some of the points related to the state level analysis. That is, based on the NFH's 3 round of data, NFH's 3, 4, and 5 from 2005-6 to 2019-21, and we'll try to understand the disparity among the states and the divergence and convergence, what is happening among the states. So, can you go to the next slide? This is what already discussed. These are 3 maps which shows the percentage of urban population and percentage of slum population and population who are multidimensionally poor in urban areas. These are the simple graph which shows their distribution across the state. Next slide, please. So this is very interesting graph. In terms of improved drinking water source, we can see the map, the progress of states from NFHS 3 to NFHS 5. There's a tremendous improvement. You can see in the last map, almost all the states are showing more than 95% of coverage of improved drinking water sources. But what is important to highlight here is that below graph you can see that the gap between state is narrowing over the times, and it is getting even smaller in 1921. And if you see the coefficient of variation values here over the last 3 time points, it has been declined from 8.8 to 2.4, and that is clearly indicating with a higher level of coverage, the convergence is happening among the states. and with the accessibility of improved drinking water sources. Next slide, please. This is access to toilet facilities in urban India. So there are some states which were shown. The first map we can see in the eastern India, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Telangana. These are the states which are having lower rate of coverage, lower accessibility of toilet facility. But in the last map, right hand side, in TNFHS 5, it has, these states have shows witnessed tremendous improvement, 15 percentage point increment over the last 15 years in these states. And basically, this suggests that with the lower initial access of these particular facilities had the highest increment. And if you see the coefficient of variation, it has declined from 12.9 to 4, and there's a significant decline, but still there is a disparities among the states. So next slide, please. The electricity, if you see the last map in NFHS 5, that has become, yes, I'll take only 2-3 minutes. So it is now widespread. Universalization has happened in case of access to electric connection. So more than, almost all the states are showing that, except 2 states, more than 90% coverage showing among in India across the states. But you can see the coefficient of variation that has declined from 6.3 to 0.9. So almost that disparity has disappeared with the time over the last 15 years. So we can see that historically in the first map, historically unserved area of the eastern or northeastern part of this India, which has improved significantly, and they have cope up. They are merging with the well-served area of the northern and western part of India. So next slide, please. This is the LPG. What already Professor Kundu mentioned, that there is a huge improvement, but still we can see clearly that color is the darker color is not. Darker colors are not there for all the states, because there are still lagging behind states in, and if you see the disparity among the states, the CV has declined from coefficient of 24 to 12.1. Still there is a huge disparity among the states, and we need to focus on these two particularly. I want to highlight that data is not shown here, but we did also we did analyze the data for lowest 20%. We have seen that there is a tremendous improvement over the last 15 years for LPG and toilet facility, but there is a disparity which clearly shows among the states that coefficient of variation also shows that there is a disparity. So we need to further improve these two particular amenities, because already other two amenities, drinking water and electricity, has been universalized with the time in India. And last point I want to make, that we need to focus on the lagging behind state in terms of the specific amenities. A very intervention, very particular, focused intervention is needed for these particular lagging behind state, as well as the vulnerable population. What we are talking about, the poor and slum population in urban areas. So achieving environmental protection from the perspective of poor necessitated not only expanding the coverage, but also it should be equally and fairly distributed. Then only we can achieve the target of no one left behind of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, goal or ambitious targets by 2030. Thank you very much. If I have not taken much time.
Okay, thank you very much. And now our discussant, Marin Mato.
Distinguished Chair, Professor Mohanty, and Professor Emeritus Mr. Professor Kundu, panelist speakers. It's an honor for me, and I am equally humbled because I feel I'm a pebble in the big Arabian Sea. No words to stand. I am also privileged to sit next to Professor Kundu. So I will compliment what he has mentioned and what the paper speaks about. Very pertinent topic which has been taken into consideration when we are talking about climate change, when we are talking about urbanization, and specifically if we talk about India, the pace of urbanization, and it has been estimated that by 2030, more than 50% of the population will be in the urban India. How do we look into the basic amenities and vis-a-vis to the poor? Aptly mentioned that when we talk about climate change, it is the perception that the poor are the polluters, but it's the other way around, that they are the most vulnerable people. Because when we talk about the coverage, although as rightly said by Professor Kundu, what the data says and what is actually on ground, you all know. Talk about Swachh Bharat Mission, which has been revolutionary in terms of providing access to toilets. But when you talk about access to toilets, to what is the percentage? And it's not only the access to water supply or the toilet. Do we have the basic amenities present in those facilities also? For example, do we have 24/7 water supply? Take the example of, when we talk about disparity, take the example of Delhi. Ideally, as per the CPHU norm, it is the, for example, for class 1 cities, it's 135 liters per capita per day. Talk about Delhi, the Luton Delhi gets 400 LPCD. And take about example of place, for example, Sangam Vihar, where the people are more poor and they are dependent on tankers. So this disparity is there. Missions talk about inclusivity, SBM, Amrut, which is on toilets, which is on water. But has it trickled down to the policy level is the question which we need to really ponder on. And when we talk about states, as you have states which have their own concerns with regard to resources, with regard to funds. And when we talk about these basic amenities, investment is more on infrastructure. What about the social needs and the aspirations of these poor and marginalized people? However, a lot of debate is happening now on this, which is a good and positive thing also. But how states can do things? Many of the states, like, leave apart the metropolitan states. What about the other states, who do not have the funds, because water and sanitation is purely a state subject. So how do we get the funds for those states? And even like now they are saying we will concentrate more towards the core zone with regard to providing infrastructure or the coverage. So why are we excluding the poor, the vulnerable, the marginalized communities into it? Because it's a lot of food for thought which through this paper which has come, and how we can take it further. Also, like there is this approach called citywide inclusive sanitation, which is an ADB and World Bank approach which talks about inclusivity, and how we talk about, like the paper did mention about the coverage of this water supply through tap water. What about the tube wells? Because they have gone dry. Why aren't we using the indigenous practices? Because if you talk about India, India has been rich with regard to traditional practices, be it rainwater harvesting or any such practice with regard to reuse, recycle, the 4 Rs which we are talking about. So all these things have to be taken into perspective, because this study can go a long way when we talk about policy and advocacy perspective. So yeah, and one example which I would like to give over here is the state of Odisha, where they are talking about the Jaga mission, which is about a land use right for the poor and the marginalized and the basic amenities, and how the convergence between different missions they are taking into perspective. So yeah, that is Might
Okay.
be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very important points. Particularly, further differentiation within cities, access, because the suggestion that, the finding that big cities, class 1 cities, bigger the cities, better the access to basic services. But within the cities, you have different zones. Very important one. Then, supply of water to the toilet facilities. I think we need more of Sukanya's micro studies to find out how many of those toilets actually are working, and we have some evidence now from some studies in schools how that has not been addressed. And funding for these things, very important. Thank you very much. Now, open for discussion for a few minutes.
Yeah. I have one.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Per 1,000 population, the number of toilets in urban areas. In metropolitan cities like Bombay, etc., I think it's quite less. And there is a huge queue for going to toilets in the morning and evening. Second, it's maintenance. And third, that dumping yards waste, how much waste are dumped and in which localities.
Thank you. We'll take more questions together and then.
Quickly, points of the chair.
Okay.
Thank you. Everybody is talking about poor, but that the intersectionality between caste, class, gender, disabled, Dalit, tribal. So that we have to look into. Who are most deprived out of this. Thank you.
Yes, please.
So though it is now almost established that poor are not the polluters, but doesn't the policy mindset in our circle see the other way? Like even if you see banning plastics, even single-use plastics, or even this Ujjwala Yojana, isn't that from the mindset of that the poor are actually using basically polluters? They are we have to prohibit them from doing and civilize them. That kind of mindset behind these policies, and why so? If it is.
Okay.